Good coffee. Good coffee. Anyway, welcome everyone. So glad you could join me today on this. What is it? No, it's not October 99th. It's October 11th. I can't get my graphics right. I'm Tom Coffey. This is a Coffee Nuance show. Just as a friendly reminder, we're on the road to 420. That's right, 420 subscribers on Rumble. Can we do it? Well, go over to rumble.com/Coffee Nuance live and follow if you can. We're at 314 right now, so we're on our way. But I got a fun thing to talk about today. It's the heard it first fallacy. And you may think to yourself, I've never heard of the heard it first fallacy. So therefore, it must not be true. That's what we're talking about. So let's get to it. How about now? Scoot over a little bit here and fix my graphic. There we go. There we go. All right, folks, I want to talk about something that's plaguing our modern world. And no, I'm not talking about Taylor Swift taking over the NFL. Or maybe that was a couple months ago. I don't know. It's called the heard it first fallacy. You know this move. You tell someone something interesting, like a fact that's just outside of their bubble, and they go, if that were true, I would have heard about it by now. Oh, you would have heard about it because you're the beacon of all things, truth and wisdom. Do you have a direct hotline to reality, or are you just reading the same 10 websites every day like the rest of us? This is the same person who's been trying to remember the name of that actor from that thing for the last 10 years. But sure, they would have definitely heard about some scientific breakthrough that wasn't mentioned between episodes of The Bachelor. You know what it is? It's laziness wrapped up in self-importance. People think they're plugged into the matrix. Like if something important was happening, Anderson Cooper would bust through their living room wall, just like the Kool-Aid Man, with breaking news. Oh yeah, you would have heard it. And people apply this logic to everything. Tell them something like, hey, did you know that AI has been writing some of the articles you've been reading for years? And they're like, if that were true, I would have heard about it. No, dude, you're busy scrolling through memes about how Monday sucks, and that's all you're hearing about. I mean, come on. We live in a time where people are surprised by basic facts. I'll say, did you know GPS doesn't need the internet to work? And they're like, that can't be right. If GPS didn't need the internet, I'd know, right? Guess you skipped that day in life. You see, the problem with the heard it first fallacy is that people think truth shows up to their door with a marching band and a pizza. No, you got to go find it. You have to read, think, explore. We've been so trained to be lazy. We've outsourced the whole process. If it's true, the news will tell me. Right. The same news that reports weather and traffic is really making time for nuanced facts. Take the ocean. 80% of it is unexplored. You tell somebody that, they're like, that can't be true. I'd have heard about it. Well, it is true. And apparently the fact that we know more about the moon than our own oceans, that's not as exciting as whatever you liked on Instagram. Or recycling. You know how we all feel good about separating our trash into different bins like we're saving the planet? Yeah. Up to 90% of the plastic we recycle doesn't actually get recycled. Tell that to someone and watch their brain explode. If that were true, I'd have heard about it. Well, buddy, corporations are not exactly racing to tell you most of your bottles are ending up in the ocean. It's not good for their brand image. Here's the deal. The heard it first fallacy is like assuming you know every good song because it's on your playlist. But guess what? There's a whole world of music out there you've never heard. Just because you haven't heard a song doesn't mean it's not great. We're living in a world where people act like they're the center of the information universe. Like if something happened and they missed it, it didn't actually happen. And the best part, when something finally does make the news, these same people act like they're suddenly experts. Oh, UFOs are real? Yeah, I totally knew that, really. So here's what I'm saying. Just because you haven't heard about something doesn't mean it's not real. It just means you haven't heard about it, and that's okay. Let's not act like your news feed is the gospel. There's a big world out there full of facts, truths, and stuff that didn't make it into your TikTok algorithm. So do me a favor. Next time someone tells you something that surprises you, instead of saying, if that were true, I would have heard about it, try, wow, tell me more. Or better yet, let me look into it. You know, like a person with curiosity and an open mind. Crazy concept, right? My name's Tom Coffey. This is the Coffee and Nuance Show, the most incredible censored commentary and news show live. Right now, flame on. Wow, big show today. Oh my God. Don't even know why I bother. Anyway, this is the heard it first fallacy. It's a mistaken belief that if something important or true were happening, it would naturally be widely reported and known. And people who fall into this trap dismiss new and unfamiliar information simply because it hasn't crossed their mainstream corporate sources. This fallacy stems from an over-reliance on conventional channels of information, such as news media, popular opinion, and a failure to recognize that not all significant truths are immediately or ever broadcast to the public. So it's this whole kind of passive approach to knowledge where individuals assume that if something were valid, they would have already heard about it from sources they trust, rather than exploring information themselves. This fallacy creates a blind spot for emerging, complex, or underreported truths and locks people into a comfort zone where only widely accepted narratives are deemed credible. So that's what I'm calling it, the heard it first fallacy. And I've run into this in my own life. And I've probably said the same words as well. Oh, if that were true, I would have heard about it. It's kind of the opposite of the mere exposure effect, right? You're familiar with that. That's a psychological, it's a cognitive bias where the more we see something, the more we like it, right? So there could just be some song and they play it all the time and you just kind of hear it in the grocery store, you hear it in the car, you hear it everywhere. And now it's familiar to you. And when something's more familiar to you, you tend to like it more. Well, this is like the opposite of that. And I see people falling into this trap all the time. You tell them something that they don't know, and they go, it can't be true. I would have heard about it. So yeah, we're calling it the heard it first fallacy. And again, and I'll probably stop doing this, but I did make a little, I had Google LM make a little podcast about this topic. I think they did a pretty good job explaining it. But once again, this is another example of how you can take something, you can take an idea, and as far as I know, I couldn't find this idea out there. I mean, it's not like a crazy inventive idea or anything. But, I was just thinking about it the other day. I was just thinking about this idea of I would have heard about it if it were true. And just got me thinking. I'm like, you know what? That should be some kind of bias. That's a cognitive bias. That's a social psychology thing. Whatever. I'm making it one, right? I'm just going to name it. So I'm naming it the heard it first fallacy. But if you got a better name of what I should call it, let me know in the comments. And I just typed up a little thing about my ideas about the heard it first fallacy. I took that, it wasn't even that long. I uploaded it to Google LM and they spit out this podcast. So let's give a listen to this podcast that was created with AI. They're AI voices and the script is AI. I didn't write the script. About this fallacy that I made up.
That feeling. Like you hear some wild fact
Yeah.
and instantly you're like, no way. If that were true, wouldn't I have heard about it by now?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's like when I found out just how little of the ocean we've actually explored.
Right. It's a surprisingly small amount.
Blew my mind. I mean, you'd think with all our technology and like centuries of sailing around,
Yeah.
but no, huge chunks of it are still a total mystery.
Total mystery.
Anyway, that got me thinking about how often we dismiss stuff just because it's new to us. Like it doesn't fit our existing mental map of the world, so we just reject it. Turns out there's a name for that, the heard it first fallacy. And it's something we're going to really get into today in this deep dive. What is it? Why do we do it? And most importantly, how can we break free from it?
Exactly. Because it can be a real roadblock to, actually understanding the world around us.
Totally. So, to kick things off, what exactly is the heard it first fallacy?
Well, in a nutshell, it's that tendency we have to equate familiarity with truth. Yeah. So if we haven't heard about something before, our brains kind of jump to the conclusion that it can't be true, or at least not that important.
Like, if it were really that big of a deal, it would have already grabbed our attention somehow.
Exactly. It's this subconscious assumption that we're already aware of everything we need to be aware of.
Which, let's face it, is pretty unlikely given the sheer volume of information out there these days.
Yeah, that's an understatement. We are bombarded with information constantly, and that actually plays a big role in why we fall into this trap. Our brains are wired to conserve energy.
Makes sense.
And sticking with familiar narratives, even if they're a bit flawed, just feels safer and easier than constantly processing new stuff that might turn our worldview upside down.
So, our brains are basically taking a shortcut.
In a way, yes, it's like saying, hey, if it's been working so far, why question it? But as you can imagine, that can be pretty limiting.
Totally. So, it's not just about laziness, it's actually about our brains trying to be efficient.
Precisely. It's a combination of factors. This need for cognitive comfort, the overwhelming amount of information we're exposed to. And that leads us right to another piece of the puzzle, these information gatekeepers. Think about it.
Who are we relying on to filter all this information?
Exactly. We have our go to news sources, our favorite websites, podcasts like this one, maybe even certain friends or family members we trust to keep us in the loop.
Yeah, makes sense. We can't be experts on everything ourselves. Like, I'm never going to have time to read every scientific study about, say, I don't know,
Yeah,
black holes or whatever.
right. Exactly. No one has the time or energy for that.
So we rely on these gatekeepers, at least to some extent, to tell us what's important.
And to be clear, that's not inherently a bad thing. It would be impossible to function otherwise. The problem is, and this ties right back to the heard it first fallacy, we can sometimes start treating these sources as infallible.
Like, if they haven't told me about it, it must not be that big of a deal.
Right. We fall into that trap of assuming what we're already exposed to represents the full picture.
Hmm. So, what can we do about it? How do we avoid letting these gatekeepers, even the well intentioned ones, limit our understanding of the world?
Well, like with so many things, it starts with awareness.
Okay, so step one, realize we might be in this trap. What's next? How do we get out?
Well, instead of just dismissing something outright because it's unfamiliar, we can get curious. Ask ourselves, why hasn't this information crossed my path before?
So instead of, if this were true, I'd have heard about it, it's more like, huh, I wonder why I haven't come across this before.
Yes, exactly. That subtle shift in mindset can make a world of difference. Is it because it challenges my existing views? Is it because it's coming from a source outside my usual bubbles?
Maybe it actually is brand new information, like a recent discovery or something.
Exactly. And then we can make a conscious choice. Do we dig deeper or do we just stick with our comfortable assumptions?
So it's about being more proactive in seeking out information,
Right.
right? Not just passively absorbing what's presented to us.
Yes. And a big part of that is diversifying those information sources we were talking about. Instead of just relying on the same handful of news outlets or websites or social media feeds.
Right, because those algorithms, they just feed you more of what you already seem to like,
Exactly. So we end up in these echo chambers, hearing the same perspectives over and over again.
which might feel comforting in the short term, but in the long term.
It can really distort our understanding of the world and how it works.
Okay, so diversify those sources. What else? Because there's still so much information out there. It can feel overwhelming,
It absolutely can. And this is where that idea of embracing uncomfortable ideas comes in.
which admittedly sounds a little counterintuitive. Who wants to be uncomfortable?
Right. But think about it this way sometimes the most important truths are the ones we've been avoiding.
because they challenge our existing worldview.
Exactly. They might force us to confront our own biases, maybe even acknowledge that we've been wrong about something.
Okay, I can see how that might be a little uncomfortable.
It can be, but it's also where the real growth happens. These aha moments of realizing, wow, I never thought about it that way before.
So we're talking about actively seeking out different viewpoints,
Yeah.
even if initially they make us feel a bit, I don't know, squishy.
Yes. Squishy is a great word for it. It's that feeling of our mental models being challenged.
And I guess the more we do that, the less squishy it becomes over time.
Exactly. We build up a tolerance for it.
Yeah.
And then those uncomfortable ideas, they become just ideas.
Interesting. So we're diversifying our sources. We're getting curious about why we haven't encountered information before. We're even actively seeking out those squishy ideas.
Yeah.
Anything else? Or are we like superhuman truth seekers at this point?
Well, almost. But there's one more crucial piece to this puzzle, and it's something the source material really highlights. It's about questioning our own desires and fears.
Because those can really warp our perception, can't they? Like we're primed to believe things that align with what we want to be true, even if deep down we might have some doubts.
It's true, and it's not always easy to catch ourselves doing it. One minute you're just, reading an article about some new scientific study. The next, you're practically planning your 150th birthday party.
Uh-huh, right. And that's where that example from the source material about human longevity comes in. It's like we hear all this buzz about how technology is going to make us practically immortal.
Right, like aging is just a problem we're on the verge of solving.
Exactly. And it's tempting to just buy into that narrative. Who doesn't want to live longer, healthier lives?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a nice idea, but the source material points out there might be some biological limits we haven't quite figured out how to overcome yet.
Limits that even the fanciest tech might not be able to fix.
Exactly.
So how do we balance that natural desire for, well, in this case, a really long life with the need to stay grounded in reality? Like, how do we avoid falling for the hype, not just with longevity, but with
Yeah.
everything?
Right. Well, a lot of it comes back to those strategies we were already talking about, like
Yeah.
being really mindful about our information sources.
Making sure we're not just getting caught in those echo chambers of wishful thinking.
Exactly. And also remembering that just because something sounds plausible,
Doesn't make it true.
right, we've got to do our due diligence.
For evidence.
Yes. Look for evidence, consider different perspective, maybe even be a little bit skeptical.
Skeptical, but not cynical. There's a difference, right?
Huge difference.
Sure.
It's not about dismissing everything out of hand.
It's about approaching information with a critical but open mind.
Exactly. Like, okay, this sounds interesting, but show me the receipts.
I like that. As for the receipts. And I guess ultimately that's how we become less susceptible to this heard it first fallacy.
Absolutely, because it's less about having all the answers right now and more about being open to constantly learning and updating our understanding of the world as new information comes to light.
Which is exciting and a little bit humbling too when you realize how much is still out there to discover.
For sure. It's like that saying,
That-
the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
So true. Well, on that note of embracing the unknown, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the heard it first fallacy. Hopefully, our listeners are walking away with a little more awareness of this common mental trap and maybe even some tools to break free from it. We'll catch you all next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of ideas and how they shape our understanding of, well, everything. Get that feeling. Like you hear some wild fact.
Yeah.
And
All right, there we go. So that was the Google LM generated podcast based on a little article I wrote about this idea of the heard it first fallacy. And I think they did a great job explaining it. And they actually came up with some terms that I never even thought of, squishy, something is squishy. Whole thing was interesting. Yeah. So anyway, that's about all I've prepared today. But I'm leaving you on this Friday with something to think about this weekend. When you hear something, you don't just dismiss it, saying like, I would have heard about it if it were true. There's so much that we don't know. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, I'll go through all of your comments, all 4 of them or whatever, in the after show, and I'll be back on Monday. Just a reminder, I did post another walking video on my walking channel, The Walk Not Taken. And this walking video is through the Boca neighborhood in Buenos Aires. It's where there's tango dancers on the street. It's kind of like an old town where there's artists, tango dancers, and the big Boca Juniors football stadium. So if you're interested in that, go check that out. Anyway, have a lovely day, and I will read your comments right after this. Peace. All right, thanks for sticking around, everybody that is still here. What's up, Lucid, John, Doug? What's up, Joe? Joe says, how many of our aha moments are actually in the wrong direction, or worse, perpendicular to the axis of truth, and not really better or worse? Well, that's part of being a human and being open to new things. Sometimes you get things wrong. I get things wrong all the time, and I'm okay with it. And if you're okay with it, it kind of makes things a little easier. Richard says, which leads to the next trap, imposter syndrome. Yeah, I should probably talk about imposter syndrome sometime. It's funny. I think a lot of times that I've seen like a celebrity or something talk about having imposter syndrome, I'm like, I agree. Well, because part of what imposter syndrome is the people are not. They're like, oh, I'm being treated like I'm all that, and I don't feel like I deserve it. And a lot of times when I see those stories, I agree. I'm like, yeah, you don't deserve it, and you are a phony. So, just another side of it. But yeah, The Walk Not Taken is the name of the channel. I only have it on YouTube right now. But you can search for it. And if you search with no spaces, you should be able to find it. Just have no spaces in it. Just The Walk Not Taken, no spaces. It's so hard. I don't know what's happened to YouTube search, but it's hard to find things now. But it is what it is. But anyway, therefore I am always right. Yeah. Perhaps the universe itself is wrong. Yeah, the universe can be wrong a lot. Why not, right? If I can be wrong, why not everybody? Yeah. So anyway, that's what I have for you today. This idea of the heard it first fallacy. It's a bit like kind of the opposite of the mere exposure effect. And the reason I brought it up is because I've said this myself. I've caught myself in this, and then I've also heard other people do it. And it's so annoying when other people say that. So that's why I wanted to share it with you today. Anyway, that's all I got. You all have an awesome weekend, and I will be back on Monday. Until then, peace. I have no idea.